welcome everyone to EV's roundtable discussion. We wanted to get everybody together and get a few different perspectives from across the industry. Understanding fleet risk is different for everybody. It's increasingly complex, and carriers have access to more information than ever before. Whether you're using telematics in-cab cameras, compliance records, coaching data, and operational metrics, many organizations still feel the same challenges together. So turning that information into timely action. So the conversation today is about identifying where risk exists, how leading fleets are addressing it, and what practical steps organizations can take to improve visibility, accountability, and defensibility. My name is Shane Gardner. I'm a senior account executive with EBE. Having started my driver career in 1998, working my way through operations and safety, along with nearly 2 decades in the fire service, this is a topic that really means a lot to me. So I'm happy to have a couple guests on here. But before we get started, we'd encourage everybody to submit questions using the Q&A feature. If you guys have something, just throw it in there and we'll address it. To help us explore the topics of keeping the targets off your trucks, we have a few guests here. Gary Faldine is an industry safety expert who brings both operational and product expertise, helping bring fleets bridge the gap between strategy and day-to-day execution. I've worked with Gary for several years. He has a long experience, a long track record with safety and operations. We also have Chris Grzink. Sorry, Chris, I butchered it again, buddy. I really apologize.
They're all good.
All right, thank you. He's a vice president of IT and has been at New Way Transportation for just under 17 years. He brings a career perspective and firsthand experience managing data integration, security, and operational infrastructure. Also joining us is Jenny Hauser, who's been with EB for 8 years. She supports our safety and application tracking solutions. She's worked closely with fleets navigating driver lifecycle management and safety workflows. Most fleets are collecting significant amounts of data and information across their operations, yet risk remains a constant challenge. Whether it's safety performance, litigation exposure, or rising insurance costs, many carriers are asking how to make better use of information they already have. We're going to go around the room with a few questions here, so we'll go ahead and get started. Gary, where do you see the biggest blind spot today in fleet risk management, and why do they persist despite all the data collected?
Well, I think that's one of the big issues is all the data collected. There is you think back, when I got into trucking, and heck, that is a long time ago. It was back in the 80s. There was virtually no technology, no information coming off the trucks. You'd ride along with drivers to get them to improve and so on. Now you just are getting overwhelmed with data that's coming to you. And you've got to be able to pick through that data and find the actionable data that is really going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. Think about it. You've got your teams out there have a finite amount of time. You can't go after everything. You need to work with vendors and providers that are going to help you tailor the solution to be able to get you information that is actionable and that you can actually use and make good safety gains in your fleet. So to me, the biggest thing is to cut through the noise, being able and then limit the information you're getting to actionable data that you can actually use. If you're getting data coming in and just and being notified of things and not using it, it does you no good and actually can hurt you in the long run as well, having that out there and not doing anything about it. So to me, that's the big thing. Cut through the noise and just work to get actionable data that you can actually do something with.
Okay, that's a great perspective. Thank you. Chris, how about you? Where do you see the biggest blind spot?
Yeah, from the IT side, echo what Gary said. It's having the right data to the right person, and making sure that the data is not misrepresented or misunderstood. That's critical. We can look at the same piece of data and see 2 different things off it. So making sure that there's alignment on what that data means. And then to Gary's point, if you're collecting data and you're not doing nothing with it, you're opening yourself up to liability that you don't want, and it's unnecessary.
Okay. Jenny, from your side, how do you help customers connect the dots with all the options out there?
So I think most fleets collect valuable information from their telematics to their maintenance records and their driver performance metrics, but it's really Those pieces are often spread across different systems and reviewed separately. Having that safety and compliance platform that can really bring everything together into one place helps create that complete picture of your driver performance so teams can make an informed, proactive decision.
Okay. And back to you from your vantage point, what separates fleets that successfully prevent incidents from those that are constantly reacting to them?
I would say that the ones that shift their focus from reacting rather than from reacting to predicting and mitigating your risk before the incident occurs, rather than asking, why did this happen? They're constantly evaluating what driver trends are towards the higher risk and what actions can be taken to really prevent those future incidents.
Okay. Fantastic. Chris, from your side?
I would say, once again, echoing the same, being proactive versus reactive is critical, and that's definitely going to separate success from failure. Everyone working for the same goal. A lot of times we departmentalize throughout the organization, and them gaps can really hurt you. So if you recognize that, create that alignment across the organization, that'll definitely help fleets be successful, hopefully in mitigating the accidents and injuries.
Okay. Gary, from your side, having worked for a number of larger carriers, where do you see success in helping fleets prevent incidents as opposed to just reacting to them?
I really think you have to have coordinated processes in place, ongoing processes that are in place. And you have to look at it throughout the whole company. And I always would divide it into 4 buckets, right? You start off with the culture. You have to have a good culture. And you hear everybody say, yeah, we've got a great culture and so on. But do you really? And, the best definition I've heard of culture is shared values, shared beliefs, and accepted patterns of behavior. So think of that in terms of safety. If everybody has the same values, beliefs, and accepted patterns of behavior, if you get your drivers and everybody in your team to have the shared value, shared belief, and accepted patterns of behavior in regards to safety, that goes a long way. And then I look at, so you got culture, then you've got teamwork. And what I mean by teamwork is it's not just safety. It's not the safety police that are going there trying to find everything that's going wrong with drivers. It's safety and operations working together to drive results. Because, think about it. Operations is dealing with that driver consistently. They're dealing with the driver the most. They have to know the processes and methods and train and use the same words that safety does when talking with their drivers. They've got to be knowledgeable about what is going on. So teamwork is very important. And what I used to always say too is, safety has to give information to ops. They don't have time to dig in and get all the safety information on all these drivers. It has to be handed to operations on a silver platter to where they can then take this information and then be able to work and talk with drivers knowledgeably. Okay, then you got, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask, building that relationship and trust internally is a big part of that handoff between safety and operations too, isn't it?
It's huge. You've got to have that. You've got to trust each other that you're going to do what's right. You can't be looking and trying to catch operations doing something wrong. You've got to trust that everybody's got the same goal and is doing is trying to make the driver safety. Safety is of utmost importance, and that comes down to the culture. So you've got your culture, you get your teamwork, and then the next big process or bucket there is training. You've got from the time a driver starts and is talking with the recruiter to the time they go through orientation to the follow-up in orientation. What is the process that drivers have to go through? And I've always seen, they get through orientation, their heads spinning. You should have about 4 to 6 weeks where you're following up each week with that driver and reinforcing what's in orientation, right? And then you've got all drivers. How do you keep your safety going for all the drivers? What are the processes you have in place? Safety tips. Anybody who talks to drivers should be given relevant safety tips, relevant weekly safety message to the drivers, monthly training with knowledge checks. And what I mean by that is that you're not just giving them training that they can just look at and not pay attention. There's got to be quizzes at the end of it to ensure that they know what's going on. That's the only way you'll know is if you have a quiz at the end. And then even annual training. So you've got this process throughout the whole life cycle of a driver. And then the other big bucket is technology. That's another way that you drive a coordinated effort to improve safety. So you've got your culture, you've got your teamwork, you've got training, and then you've got technology. And really only by addressing all of those areas are you going to improve safety throughout your whole company, and not just going after individual incidents. Now, it's important to go after events, but the big picture is having the whole process laid out so it just keeps going.
Okay. It looks like we got a question that came in, which is pretty timely here. I'll just ask you, Gary, what's the earliest warning sign that a fleet is heading towards a preventable incident?
Really one of the earliest warning signs I would say is, and there's a lot of warning signs that can happen, but first of all, is training not getting done? Are events, the frequency of events going in the wrong direction? And that's where it's so important to have very good tracking of events that are coming off the truck, coming off video. So, I used to always say it's like a carrier is like a big ship. Once you start veering off course and you start really veering off course, it's twice as hard to get it back on track. And then you're going to start seeing, lagging indicator, which is the accidents starting to occur. You've got to address the issues as soon as you see them starting to move at all in the wrong direction and fix it before it ever gets to that point. So, you've got, is training being done on time? Frequency of events, following distance, speeding, distractions. Are you looking at violations coming in? Do you have MVR monitoring so you know right away when things are going the wrong way and getting on top of it right away? So I think that's just important to have good metrics, good tracking, and then getting on top of things before they get too far out of whack. And then you can fix those also by building them into your, adding some of that training to fix these things into your processes that you already have set up.
Okay. Chris, what early warning signs do you see or indicators that you're relying on to identify risk before it becomes an incident?
Yeah, so we weigh heavily on the data we're obtaining to try to get ahead of that. If a driver is willing to, let's say, speed, on day one, and then day two, we have to put some action behind that data right away, make sure that there's alignment. So from our standpoint, we utilize the data, making sure that we're not just obtaining the data, but we're doing something with it. And that's critical to help then put steps in place to mitigate that risk.
And Jenny, from your perspective, what are some pattern shifts that you typically see, and how do you work with customers to help coach them through identifying early on how to manage that risk?
So we look at emerging trends in their driver behavior, especially increases in repeated occurrences and escalating corrective actions over time. These patterns often indicate a risk is developing before it results into an incident. Within the safety and compliance system, these indicators are easy to identify by using the telematics module, the corrective action module, and the overall driver risk view. Telematics help you surface the changes in that driver behavior pattern. The corrective actions highlight those repeat and escalating interventions, and the driver risk brings everything together to make it an easy spot where you can see where those trends start to shift in the wrong direction.
Okay. Back to Chris over in IT specifically. How do you work through disconnected, not just teams, but technology? How do you work through disconnected systems or workflows? And how does that impact your ability to coach effectively?
So it's a big disruption for both in the cab and in the back office. Without that data, now we're blinded to what's happening. We utilize camera systems as well in our cabs and our trucks. So without that visibility, we lose what's happening at times. So that could definitely affect coaching. If we don't have the video, I can't tell you how many times we went through a coaching session and the driver, no, I didn't do this. It's not like that they're lying about it. They just don't recall it. We as humans start to get into habits of doing things, and we don't even realize sometimes we may be doing things. And, utilizing that data, that video, we're able to then refresh their memory on what's happening. They take accountability and we move forward. But without that data, it also increases our risk. If there were something to happen, now all of a sudden, why didn't you have this data on this particular unit, but you have it for all your other units? So the disruption of a disconnected system is very wide and harming throughout the fleet.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Gary, from your side, you've worked with a couple different systems. How do you enforce or help them work together?
Yeah, I think anybody who's used the technology out there, which virtually every carrier is using right now, understands the problem is when you have different systems alerting and notifying a driver or the back office, and it's not consistent. You can have following system, trigger or collision mitigation off the truck. You can have collision mitigation that could be triggering through the video. And if the driver is getting different notifications for the same thing, it's a huge driver irritant at a time. And it's always an issue keeping drivers, especially in OTR with OTR carriers. You can't do things that are going to irritate the driver. And you need the driver buy-in with this technology. And you're not going to get driver buy-in when you have these systems that are not coordinated and working together. So you need to figure out, and again, I'm sure all the carriers have been through this out there. You look at the systems that are on the truck, and your provider of these systems should help you coordinate that and make sure that you're not getting, different signals, different triggers for the same event. And then you're just filling the back office with issues they have to deal with, and then just irritating the heck out of the driver with all these alerts that are coming in. You need to pick a system that's going to alert the driver and then go with that. And then you turn off the others.
When there's noise, if the driver experiences noise and they think it's irrelevant, they're going to ignore it.
Exactly right. You're exactly right. And they're going to get frustrated and mad, and that's the last thing you want when a driver's out on the road.
So turning data into meaningful action. Chris, what are you guys doing on your side to turn that into organizational action?
Trying to make sure that everybody's aligned around that data. Like I said previously, there's a lot of data, and if you don't have alignment throughout your organization, that person may actually use that data for the wrong way, or may misinterpret what that data is really telling them. So it's really critical that there's alignment around the data. It's consistent. Then processes are consistent. They go to the same place to look at that data, or they receive that data the same way. They understand the data, and then there's action to it. So I would say that's probably the biggest challenge in that, is making sure that they are effectively doing something consistently with that data.
Turning it back to Jenny, what do you see as the biggest challenge?
So to kind of piggyback off of what Chris said, it's really not the lack of your safety data. It's figuring out what matters in that moment and turning that into something actionable fast enough to make a difference. From my perspective, safety leaders are often dealing with a steady stream of information from telematics, compliance tracking, and driver behavior. The difficulty is cutting through all of that and identifying what needs attention right now versus what can wait.
Okay.
Let me jump in real quick with that. What Jenny said was also making sure that you're not too proud or locked in. There are times where you have to adjust, right? There's data we get, and over time we find out this isn't an indicator. It's good data, but it's not a leading indicator. So we need to pivot and let's focus on this data instead. So just making sure that you're willing to change.
So taking a risk, addressing it. If you realize that it's not actionable or valid data, move on.
Correct. Yep.
Yep. Okay. We have another question from the group here. It says, how do you balance automation and human judgment when deciding which safety events require immediate intervention versus coaching over time? Why don't we start with you, Chris?
This is that's like a loaded question. That is something that takes time to figure out. I mean, um, our safety department may determine, hey, this month may be distracted driving month, or this month they may pick out something that they want to bring more focus on. They'll utilize the data if they see that maybe backing accidents are up this month. Maybe they see a trend going the wrong way. They'll then take that and determine, okay, we're going to go down this route and then start coaching off of that data. But it's still going to be a one-on-one. It's still going to be that safety person looking at that data and determining, does that really warrant a coaching, or is it just, it's okay. It kind of goes into that white noise, right? So
are you guys focusing on right now what is it, 100 days of safety? Do you have any special initiatives right now for anything like that?
we're not doing nothing specific for that, but we've got a extremely robust, when Gary was mentioning all the different things people should be or companies should be doing, I sit back and I kind of smirk and think that's nice to hear that, because yep, I start checking off the boxes. Are we, New Way a perfect company? Absolutely not. There isn't none. But we do have things in place, systems in place that surely help us. And for sure, you know, uh, every day is something, from a safety message to whatever the case may be.
Sure. And Gary, how do you realize balancing automation and human judgment has an impact on safety?
That's where some expertise in safety comes in. To know what you need to go after. Like I talked before about having good metrics. Know when you can cut through the noise and get to the actionable data. I mean, there's so much out there, but you've got to know what is relevant and going to make a difference, right? And you can't just go crazy on a hard brake or whatever. You got to look at the hard brake and find out what the root cause is. And for example, like speeding, you got to look at, okay, what's the root cause of that? You got the technology that gave you the driver speeding, but really, is that driver on a run where we're putting them in a position where they have to speed? So there's a lot of judgment that comes in with all this technology and all these events, and you've got to look below the surface and talk to the drivers and not just jump to conclusions on that when you're dealing with them.
Great. I think what we'll do is we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about pre-hiring. We're talking about progressive applicant tracking. The challenge that surface with a driver's tenure often starts before they're a driver. So how do we kind of get that embedded within them? How can a more progressive ATS solution and hiring process help fleets reduce negligent hiring to keep the target off your truck? And what are the gaps you typically see when hiring practices are challenged after an incident? Why don't we just start with you, Gary?
What I would say is every carrier's got their guidelines, right? And they are guidelines. They're not totally black and white. I would say that they're guidelines, but you have to follow your guidelines. And if you don't, you have to be able to say why, right? Say you have a certain number of accidents that you will disqualify a driver coming in, or you have a point system or whatever. And you look at it and you say, you know what, this driver, it's backing accidents. Is there something you can do to help that driver and fix it? All right. So what I mean by that is, okay, you may be going outside of your guideline, but then you can show you did something about it. you put them through training, you had them in the yard with the trainer, you had them back and back and back and demonstrate that they could do it properly, explain the proper techniques, and have that all documented. And then you can mitigate some of the liability by bringing that driver on board. But some of it is a judgment, and everything can't be black and white. You got to look at it. But if you do go outside it all, you better be able to explain why and what did you do about it to fix the problem that was out there. And again, you got to be very careful with this, and use it in certain circumstances. And for example, I mean, backing was a common one that I would see, and we'd be eliminating drivers because of it. Well, yeah, you look at their history, they're a newer driver, they may not have been trained properly, no violations out there, everything else is good. Can we fix that one issue? And then have the documentation and training to show that they did it properly and the problem was fixed. Also, files, you just need to make sure that your DQ files are 100% when you bring a driver on board. A plaintiff attorney is going to look for missing or incorrect data on it. You need to audit those files. You have to have all the information in there within, for example, 30 days. And then do you have a process of auditing them? And there's vendors and there's companies that can even help you with that, with AI, to run the DQ file through and say, hey, this doesn't look right, something's missing. But it's something the plaintiff attorney is going to look at. Is something missing? You should never even have hired this guy or this driver. So you got to make sure that is 100% as well when you're bringing those drivers on.
Great. Thank you for that. Chris, from your side, how have you utilized ATS, applicant tracking solution, to pre-hire before they become drivers to help reduce that risk?
It brings the consistency. It does take away them gray areas. We utilize, go figure, EBE, and we rely on the system. We've put business rules in place throughout that system so that we are just really managing the exceptions. We let the system do its work, so that there's a consistent flow, and that we don't have to worry about, if something were to happen and litigation gets involved, I feel confident we've got all the documents we need. Otherwise, that system would be yelling at us. We've got, we followed the business rules. We haven't taken any gray areas. We're not, without that system, it opens it up. And all of a sudden, there's a lot of human elements that can affect judgment. And having that system in place just helps bring that consistency and really helps us stay where we need to be. So can't say enough about it.
Thank you. Jenny, with your experience working directly with customers with negligent hiring in mind, how have you seen customers tighten up those gaps?
So I couldn't agree more with what Gary and Chris said. But I also just want to add that all of these things really matter, because in a post-incident review, fleets aren't just judged on whether they followed their own policies. They have to be consistent, and it's not just whether the driver looked qualified at the time. So using that applicant tracking system to structure and to have that repeatability is so very important.
Thank you. Back to you. At what point in the recruiting and onboarding process do you think safety culture is truly established? And how do you see it carrying through the day-to-day driver interactions?
So I really think it starts at the point when the driver moves from applicant to hire. Recruiting sets that expectation, but onboarding is where the drivers see what the company actually enforces. If your ATS is structured to consistently enforce those safety gates like ours, for example, your MVRs, your PSP, your clearinghouse, your employment verifications, this can send an early signal that safety isn't just flexible or subjective. It becomes part of the hiring system, not just policy on paper.
Okay, that's a good point. Chris, we've talked about this before, drivers, word of mouth. Culture is not, from the driver to operations, it kind of spans throughout a company. Why don't you talk a little bit about your experience with helping that safety culture evolve?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it is critical that it has to be organization wide. We can have the best culture in the office, but if that doesn't carry through to in cab, we don't have no culture. And it's really critical because, to your point, drivers talk before a driver applies. I hope they already know what New Way stands for and what we expect. And having the systems in place allow us then from that recruiter, they're not there just to put a warm body in a seat. They know what we expect. They understand our requirements. So it is well before that driver even applies that I would hope that they understand our safety culture so that because otherwise they're just wasting their time. We want to hire safe drivers to make sure they get home as well as the motoring public. It's that simple.
Okay. Gary, at what point in the process do you think safety is truly established?
I think it really starts right, obviously with the company's reputation, but as far as actually dealing with drivers, it's recruiting. The recruiters need to know the company stance on safety. For example, if a recruiter sees that a driver has some speeding violation, for example, yet they're still within guidelines, the recruiter would want to say, let the driver know the stance of the company on speeding, that we expect our drivers not to speed. Ideally, you've got great CSA scores, and you can put it in that in terms for the driver that, and we've got great CSA scores because our drivers don't speed. Uh, and it helps all of our drivers. Wheels are going to be turning more. You're not going to be pulled for inspections and that. So it starts off in recruiting or in recruiting. It carries right on through into orientation, where you've got ops coming in and talking with the drivers, safety. You've got everybody speaking the same language. It goes through after orientation, for the 4 to 6 week follow up. You've got all of your training that's going through there. And again, to ensure that it carries throughout the day to day to the driver, everybody needs to go through the same training in that company. And I don't that the drivers go through. And I don't mean that, you're going to be doing behind the wheel training for everybody in the office, but training that gets pushed out to the drivers has got to go up to the office as well. So they know exactly what's going on and can again speak the same language as that driver. I mean, that's all that is real important to bring them into your culture right off the bat, and then keep them into your culture. And then also, how often is ops and safety having joint meetings? There should be a cadence where either it's every other week, whatever you decide on, where ops and safety get together and they have a meeting and they talk about new training that's going to be pushed out, trends that they're seeing, and so on. Again, that's a process that just keeps going and will keep the culture going forever with those drivers. So starts at recruiting, but then just keeps on going.
We've heard that several times today. Alignment is such an important piece between operations and safety.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll shift gears a little bit. We're going to talk about exposure and defensibility. So as legal expectations continue to evolve, often documentation, consistency, whether safety processes are followed as intended. And when an incident occurs, what are the most common gaps you see that may increase a fleet's legal exposure? Why don't we start with you, Gary?
Yeah, I would just say not following the processes you have in place. First of all, I mean, that's easy for a plaintiff attorney to pick up on. Say you've got monthly training that goes out there and you had training on rear end accidents, and this driver didn't go through that training. You didn't follow up to make sure they went through the training. And then lo and behold, he has a rear end accident. All right. That's just showing that you don't have very tight controls on your processes. Processes have to be followed. And if they're not, you better be able to explain why they weren't and have good documentation as to why they don't. Poor documentation is a killer. And, what I always say is you got to close the loop. And what I mean by closing the loop is, okay, so a driver has an event. That event needs to be reviewed with the driver. And what did they do wrong? Does the driver, and then train the driver on how to do it properly. So they know the driver has got to know what they did wrong, and not just know what they did wrong, but they've got to know how to correct it. You can't just send a video to a driver and say, "Hey, you had this issue, and don't let it happen again." They may not even know how to correct that issue or what the technique should be to fix it. A right lane change. Do they lean and look before they do a right lane change? If you just say, "Hey, don't have a right lane change issue again," well, they need to know what they did wrong and how to correct it, and it's got to be documented. The driver needs to understand that, and then the driver needs to demonstrate that they can do it properly. Ideally, the best way is that you're riding with that driver then, and then they demonstrate the proper technique. It doesn't have to be done with everything out there, but the driver should be able to repeat back to you the proper technique on how to fix whatever went wrong. All right. And then this is very important, that the driver commits to fixing the problem and following the proper methods. And all this needs to be documented. I've had drivers say, they may understand what you're talking about, but they say, I've been doing this for 30 years and I haven't had a problem. And they're not going to change. How do you keep that driver? If they're telling you outright, they're not going to do that. So you've got to, so again, closing the loop on that with the documentation, the driver understands what they did wrong, the training to fix it, the driver demonstrates how to do it properly, they commit to fix it, and then it gets signed off.
Okay. Jenny, switching over to you. So incomplete, inconsistent documentation has kind of been covered. What else, missing DQ files, gaps in training records, what else are you seeing as ways to mitigate this risk?
So I think this is, to kind of build off of what Gary said, this is where technology can really play a crucial role. Integrating things like your ATS, your onboarding, your training, your maintenance, and your safety platform can really help close the documentation gaps by creating those DOT compliant applications, managing your required documents and training, maintaining your DQ files, and tracking your vehicle inspections, maintenance, and repair history, and really having that centralized auditable record for both your driver and your vehicle compliance activities helps fleets demonstrate consistency and accountability and adhere to their safety requirements.
With the ability to audit that as well, that's extremely important at any time. How about you, Chris?
Ditto. I mean, as far as just making sure you have them consistent processes in place and making sure that you put in action when you recognize, when you see that data, that you're doing something consistently. Definitely. We utilize, once again, EVE's documentation system as well as the LMS, and it is critical because, once again, we go from managing the whole system to just managing exceptions, and that really helps focus so that we are compliant, at any given point. So,
and how this is a little off the cuff. How has that helped you in defending a claim over the years?
we have everything. We have everything readily available when needed. When called upon, we know where to go to get it. And there's been many times where once documentation has been provided, all of a sudden that issue goes away because they know we're prepared. They know this isn't some fly-by-night company that's just, out there recklessly hauling freight. So definitely having the processes and systems in place definitely help. They could hinder too, though, if we ignored them, right? So, just because you have a system, it's only as good as what you're going to do with it.
Hey, Shane, just one thing I'd like to add as well
Yeah.
that I probably should have brought up also is that, documentation is so important. You got to have good documentation, but you have to be careful what you put on that documentation as well, because it's all discoverable.
Yep.
So stick to the facts. Don't get into personality conflicts or this driver is a crazy, he's in it, whatever the case may be. And I believe me, I've seen it all to the point where, you know, especially when you have new safety people out there, you've got to be so careful and be so professional when you're writing up and documenting this, because someone's going to look at that and it can really come back to haunt you if you just don't stick to the facts, be concise, and, you know, don't give, you know, too much of your opinion on the personality or things like that of the driver. If you know what I'm saying, you just got to be very careful with that, what you are writing down.
Mm-hmm. So back to you, Gary, from a legal standpoint, how's the expectation around reasonable safety practices evolved in recent years?
You know, here's what I would say with that. Reasonable safety practices. There's so much technology out there right now that is becoming the standard. And plaintiff attorneys will ask, you know, why aren't you using it if you're not using it? And something to keep in mind as well, they are getting better and better at knowing the questions to ask. I mean, I've been through depositions. I'm sure many of the people on this call have been. And sometimes I would just be hoping they didn't ask this question. Well, I can tell you what, or kind of know the technology to even go deeper into it. They are getting very good at that. They know what to ask. They know what to look for. The sophistication of the plaintiff attorney as far as with technology is getting better and better all the time. And, you know, and there is an expectation that carriers are using this. And believe me, that carriers are using the technology that's out there. And if you're not, you know, you just need to have a reason why, because you can't use everything, but you have to talk knowledgeably as to why you're not. And believe me, they'll put that in front of a jury and they'll say, you know, for example, collision mitigation, bad rear end accident. Why did the carrier not have this on their trucks? You know, and you just have to be ready to answer that.
So we've discussed risk from a legal perspective. We looked at a couple different angles, recruiting, onboarding, operations, safety. Common thread among these seems to be alignment, right? I think that's pretty important. So when organizations create visibility across those departments, they're in a stronger position to identify issues earlier. Gary, how can operations and legal teams better align around proactive risk management instead of only engaging after an incident?
Well, again, you know, proactively knowing your trends, have good metrics, have scorecards out there, being able to track and monitor what's going on and be able to do something about it before it ever gets to the point of an accident or where you'd be going into litigation. It's just having very good clarity as to what's going on, cutting through the noise, having vendors that you can work with that aren't just overloading your system with so much information out there that you can't even deal with it. You have to have your thresholds set properly on what the triggers are. If you have AI that's on in the trucks, is that accurate or is that throwing all kinds of false information to you? You know, you got to have it, whittle it down to what's actionable and work with your providers and carriers to do that, and then have good metrics to see when things are going out of whack and react quickly to them.
So to expand on that, having a defensible safety program, what does that look like in real time? And the visibility, how does that help in creating that defensible safety program?
Well, you know, if you have your processes in place, right? You've got well-defined processes from when a driver starts. You've got all your training. You've got all that going on throughout the life cycle of a driver. That's certainly going to help. And you follow your processes. First of all, hopefully you're eliminating accidents so you don't have them in the first place then. So I keep going back to a process. I mean, you know, being in safety, you know, you're always dreading that call at night. You're always dreading, and it can happen to the safest carrier in the world. But you can feel some comfort when you know you've got good processes in place and they're being followed by everybody throughout the organizations and you've got good tracking to see they're being followed, and you've got good tracking to see if anything's starting to go out of whack. You can sleep good at night when you have that, hopefully.
Jenny, how about from your interaction with customers? How does having a defensible safety program help with visibility and consistency?
I think it's not enough just to have policies in place. Organizations need to be able to show that the right people were hired, properly trained, operating safely, and supported by compliant processes. Real-time visibility really makes that possible. And ATS helps verifying hiring requirements, your ODO and your LMS, document your onboarding and your training, and our core safety and compliance tracks those incidents and corrective actions and vehicle maintenance to ensure that the fleet and the equipment meet those safety standards.
And from your perspective, what area of the driver lifecycle creates the most risk when documentation is missing?
So, in my opinion, really the biggest risk that stands out is that on-demand orientation in those driver qualification files. If you do not have your documentation set right from the start, starting with your on-demand orientation to bring that driver in, it really creates a lot of risk. And if you do not have all those DQ files, you can be in a world of trouble.
Okay. We've covered a lot of ground today. I want to leave our audience with something practical that they can take back to their organization. So we're going to go around the panel for one more thought. And we'll start with you, Jenny, since you're up right here. If you could implement one change tomorrow that would have the biggest impact on reducing fleet risk, improving safety, strengthening defensibility, all of the things we've talked about today, what would that be?
I think it would be moving away from incident response to risk prevention. That means using the data and the tools you already have to identify those high risk behaviors early, coaching consistently, and measure improvement over time. Organizations that make that shift not only see better safety outcomes and lower costs, but they're also far better positioned to demonstrate a culture of accountability and defensible fleet management when they're challenged.
Okay, great perspective. How about you, Chris?
I was going to say strengthening safety culture throughout the fleet, from the receptionist to the chairman, takes an entire team to be aligned around those processes, everybody working together to achieve the same results, and then utilizing having systems. The technology is plentiful nowadays. So making sure that you're able to put technology in place and then utilizing it. And I think by doing that, you'll definitely be able to reduce the risk throughout your fleet.
I like that comment around receptionists to the chairman. I've been to a lot of different facilities, from carriers to LTL companies, et cetera. And that entrance, when you meet the receptionist, sets a stage for the meeting, in my opinion. I think having somebody that's aligned, as you stated, just has such a big impact across an organization.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How about you, Gary? If you could implement one thing tomorrow, what would that be?
I would say if there was one thing, it would be the teamwork throughout the whole company, that everybody is on the same page and understands what needs to be done with safety. Again, like I talked about at the very beginning, and I know we brought this up a lot, it can't just be the safety police out there. And you can't be perceived as a safety police. It's got to be a whole team effort with safety, operations, claims. Everybody who deals and talks with drivers has to be aligned on how to improve safety. And again, speak the same language, use the same terms that drivers will understand for your company. It's part of the culture. It's part of your culture on how you train and how you talk with drivers, on the technique and all the preventive techniques out there for driving and injury prevention.
Great. Thank you very much. Let me just check the poll to see if we have any additional questions. It looks like we are clear. So I think what we can do is just wrap up here. We've talked a lot about safety and alignment and process. It's not just a priority, it's a foundation of everything we do. I think what stood out most in this conversation is that to achieve that level, it's not just about policy. It's about having process, the right tools, and the right information at the right time. Alerts for missing paperwork, alerts for DQFM that might be out of place, et cetera. If anything we discussed today resonates with you, we'd welcome an additional conversation. Don't hesitate to reach out. We'd be more than happy to answer questions or meet with your team to talk about this a little more in length. I want to thank our speakers, Gary, Chris, and Jenny. You guys did a fantastic job. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate your time, and thank you everybody for joining.